So we came here today to talk with our special guest about the top 5 black stars that ended up in the PWI 500 list. However, number 13, Mr. Big E, has come to storm and take hostage this conversation. We're going to talk about it along with Mr. Kevin McElvaney, straight from PWI, in just a second. So stay tuned. This is WrstlXtra.
Yo, folks, this is WrstlXtra. I am your boy, A Dazzle, along with my tag team partner, Mex, the WrestleManiac, if you will.
Come on.
And, oh my word, you are listening on AffinityExtra.com and you are watching live right now on the WrestleManiac UK YouTube channel. We are very delighted and humbled to have Mr. Kevin McElvaney with us, editor-in-chief of the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. Of course, the PWI 500 came out just last week. I did my great review. Took me all day yesterday, but no. Big E had other plans for today. And we are here. Let me first of all welcome Kevin. Kevin, just for the people who don't know who you are, who don't know who the magazine, well, what the magazine is, I'm guessing they're not real pro wrestling fans if they don't. But just give us just a quick intro as to who you are, what you do, and yeah, let's go from there.
So maybe the magazine, you give me too much credit. If people don't know who I am, that's perfectly normal. But I'm the editor-in-chief of Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, which has been a fixture of professional wrestling since 1979, part of a larger family of magazines, all of which are no longer in production. The Wrestler, Inside Wrestling, Sports Review Wrestling, a number of other titles, commonly called the After Mags. That might be a term that some viewers might be more familiar with. I replaced, after freelancing for over a decade, I replaced Stu Sachs as editor-in-chief last year. He trained me how to do the job. You know, my life's honor here. I mean, this is a magazine I grew up reading. Just to be trusted with that responsibility and to be able to, do more if I can, along with the talented group of writers that we have for the world of wrestling. We tend to be available in the UK, WH Smith stores. I know it's not plug time yet, just saying.
No, go for it.
You can always order.
Of course.
Later, you can always order online, subscribe. We essentially ship anywhere in the world. Shipping is a little more if you're very far away from the United States, but that's the general view. The PWI 500, which I guess we're going to talk about eventually.
At some point.
Yeah, that's kind of our bread and butter. It's an annual ranking of the top 500. The way we refer to it now is top 500 heavyweight in the wrestlers in the world. Now, is everyone literally a heavyweight? Perhaps not, but that's maybe something we can talk about later on.
Cool. So yeah, we were going to talk about the PWI 500, but something happened. Vince McMahon decided to switch the script a little. He probably ripped it up an hour before Raw started, and Big E cashed in his Money in the Bank contract and is now the new WWE champion. Now, with the way things happened, it is crazy because we saw earlier yesterday, I think it was about afternoon here, we saw Big E tweet that he is going to cash in his Money in the Bank contract. A little controversial in the sense where usually it literally comes out of nowhere. We don't know who's going to do it. I think only Daniel Bryan was someone who said when he was going to do it at one point. Braun Strowman kind of did something similar as well. But usually it's someone who comes literally out of nowhere, cashes in, and the big thing we talk about is the surprise. This time it wasn't a surprise, but yet we are absolutely elated. Now, for me, the talk is that this decision by Vince and whoever else it was in reaction to the ratings last week of AEW Dynamite compared to WWE Raw. I'm going to ask you first, Mex. Do you think that it was a reaction? Do you think it was done in the right way, in the best way? What are your thoughts on this crazy scenario, this crazy madness that happened last night?
Well, first off, congrats to Big E.
Something
that many a fan have been asking for years. And seen for years. I know you've been a massive advocate for it. So yeah, definitely congrats to Big E. Now, yeah, the AEW rating of last week was definitely a factor. Must have been. It's also been said Monday Night Football, NFL, has returned to television in the US. So possibly another factor to keep their ratings, maintain their ratings and stuff like that. I, as happy as I am, I've actually dubbed this on my channel the worst successful cash-in ever.
What?
Successful cash-in.
Go for it. Tell me why.
There's been terrible botches of the whole briefcase and stuff anyway, but it's because of this is the whole point of the Money in the Bank. It's the surprise element of you can come out. And yes, like you said, we have had in the past Strowman, Rob Van Dam, some other names said, I'm cashing in at this point, at this time. But again, that was done in advance somewhat, and we still had time to tell a story before we got to that point. Right. This was literally like the dirt sheets got hold of this story of Big E and Samoa Joe were meant to turn up on Raw. On Monday night. Obviously, they decided, okay, Samoa Joe, let's just tell everyone you've got an injury and we'll take the belt from you and decide whatever happens with you afterwards.
Allegedly.
Back to your day job. Allegedly. Let's not get anyone in trouble here. And that's what happened to Joe and Big E. We saw the tweet, cat's out of the bag. This is what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And then, hours later, Big E was holding a WWE Championship above his head. Now, on the night, I felt they dealt with it pretty well. Big E came out, opened the show, rah speech, I'm going to do this. Didn't care what Randy Orton and Bobby Lashley were saying to each other. I'm walking out of here as champion. So, insult each other what you like. And then at the end of the show, how it was dealt with, I thought was, again, really good. But this isn't what the purpose of the Money in the Bank is for, in my opinion. It is for that surprise kind of pop moment. Obviously, Big E could have failed thank God he didn't. Bobby, could have went on, maybe had a match with Lesnar at Mania, maybe if they ever wanted to give us that match. Lesnar could have won the title at Mania, and Big E comes out straight away and cashes in on Lesnar. That could have been massive to build him, pinning Brock Lesnar. But, or like we said before, the whole thing with the New Day and Bobby Lashley was ongoing throughout the summer. If you just keep Big E, his attention, he's got one eye on that,
very true.
Just watch that plan out, and then when you need a rating, you can pull the trigger because you've already built it in the background. Then but they've done it now. Big E's champion, grateful, but I'm sticking with it. It's the worst successful cash-in I've ever seen.
So here's the thing. So for me, the initial idea of making it happen kind of just out of nowhere, the tweet earlier in the day was like, what are we doing? Again, as you said, it's not what we're used to in terms of the Money in the Bank. It probably kind of kills the substance of what we know and expect Money in the Bank to be about and what it's for, or to us at least what it's for. But with the way it worked out on Raw itself, I guess it was done the best way possible. But yeah, we definitely did have missed out on building more of a story, more of a suspense to it. As you said, Mex, very rightly about Bobby Lashley mixing it up with Kofi and Xavier Woods over the last few weeks. We even saw there was a clip that was on the net a few weeks ago with Big E watching Bobby Lashley against Kofi and Woods at a live event. That had us, going thinking, okay, Big E's having a watch here. He's looking. So I guess we have missed out on that. Kevin, how do you feel about it? Have we lost, or did it lose the whole mystique of the Money in the Bank, or as we've come to know it?
Well, it's a little anticlimactic. You know, as you both said, it's very much the exception to the rule, maybe 3 or 4 times out of many briefcases handed out over the years. Better part of 20 years now, I think. So definitely rare to do it that way. Does take it's a little bit anticlimactic because you don't have that exciting moment at a pay-per-view or just completely out of nowhere at the end of a Raw or SmackDown. Whether or not it was done to you know, not counter AEW because they're not in the same time slot. You can watch both shows very easily.
Right.
I think maybe the timing changed, but the fact that Big E stated his intentions before the show was for sure a way to try to get people to watch, which I think ratings wise, that's very smart. And obviously if you're going to go with anybody, I mean, there's this talk and who knows how true any of it is, but the talk of WWE shifting away from we're going to hire indie guys and train them in our style and more train our own. And I mean, Big E, perfect example of that, of a homegrown talent.
For sure.
You know, if they were doing it now, I mean, yeah, they're heading in the football season. There's a lot of other reasons to want to bring the rating up. But the truth is, both Raw and SmackDown, you have these really strong heels who are on top of the brand. WWE has struggled in recent years with building up just long-term baby faces who fans stay invested in. And I think Big E is a perfect way to do that.
Very true.
Nobody's questioning whether he belongs in there. It was such a long, and in fact, I told a friend of mine who has not been watching WWE much lately, like, hey, pretty sure they're about to put the belt on Big E. You might want to turn it on. And I mean, his thing he said right after, just awesome. Finally, like, why did this not happen sooner? But you know, it happened now. And I think it's a good time for it to happen. And you know, he can do really, really well in that role. Now, I mean, as far as how it was actually pulled off, what I did like, I think this is eventually what they were going to do, even if it was going to be more of a surprise initially, because they did telegraph it in some ways. As you said, the interactions with Kofi and Xavier, but also just the fact that you had the New Day split up. Really, there was no way to get them back together short of, you know, somebody being signed to another brand or winning a championship on another brand and then having to go over. So that was a way to bring the group back together. But then also just the way that, you know, Lashley wasn't, he had his leg was a little beat up, but he wasn't completely laid out. He had just won a match really decisively. You know, he had a moment to regroup. So it didn't make, the one upside I think is that it didn't make Big E look like he was completely cheap shotting him. Like he was taking advantage of the situation the way that you're supposed to. You have that briefcase whenever you want. And I think one other cool thing about this is if you look back at how Big E won the Money in the Bank, was holding on to it, kind of picking, choosing, waiting for his spot. And then think back to how Lashley won the title to begin with. And I mean, that was also, he sent Miz to do his dirty work because Miz had the briefcase. But even think back, like, why did, I really think this might have been some pretty long-term storytelling, because I mean, you go back even to Miz having the briefcase. He was never supposed to have the briefcase. Then he won the briefcase, and it was kind of like, okay, why does Miz have the briefcase? Now, I mean, we know it's because he beat Otis. It seemed a little contrived at the time, but it resulted in the Lashley title reign, which, you know, again, this is poetic justice. Really cool. I thought it was a good execution, even if it was a little bit anticlimactic in terms of Money in the Bank cash-ins.
Yeah, for sure. That's my thoughts exactly. And you know, I love the point that you made about it being, you know, long-term storyline, and I definitely genuinely believe that it was always supposed to be Big E cashing in on Bobby Lashley. That's no doubt in my mind at all. I just feel this happened a little earlier than maybe planned. Whether that was in reaction to something or just someone's decision out of nowhere, who knows? Again, it was pulled off in the best way on the show itself. On Raw, it possibly could have. Lashley didn't lose out in the way it happened to him. Big E looks great. Big E still had to put in the work to beat Lashley. I love the fact that it almost happened. I almost thought that Big E was going to be unsuccessful. That would have been a story in itself. I don't know what the reaction would have been. It would have been here, there, and everywhere from everyone. But that would have been great. But yeah, just the fact that, you know, both men have come out on looking fine. Of course, Big E's champion. But looking back on Bobby Lashley's reign, for me, you know, we've now had 3 black champions. For me, Bobby Lashley is the personification of what a champion should be. And I think for me, his run is perfect. The whole demeanor that he had, coming out in amazing suits and all of that, just being all about the wrestling, decimating most of his opponents that he's had, even though they were Drew McIntyre, Goldberg, Braun Strowman, people that, you know, are big dominant guys in themselves. How Kevin, how do you rate Bobby Lashley's run? And I'm gonna bring that into us actually talking about what we were planned to talk about today.
We'll get to how that informed his 500 ranking and all that, but he very good. I think it could have been a little bit longer, and maybe originally was supposed to be a little bit longer. But as far as the reign goes, like you said, he was convincing. He defeated high quality of competition. He was beating these top level guys convincingly, you know, like knocking out Drew McIntyre, that kind of thing. That's very big, especially the way Drew was built up. Obviously the run up to that was awesome as well. He was very well. I mean, even when he lost the US title, he was very protected. You know, obviously the Hurt Business, I mean, it's been talked about many, many times, but just such a great way to elevate him, to at least temporarily elevate the rest of the group. You know, I mean, and that can still be, you know, salvaged in some ways. But I think the main goal was always to get Lashley up really, really high on the card and not have it feel weird. I mean, he had this because if you look back at WrestleMania last year, he was on the losing end of a feud with Aleister Black, who was also not like a huge top star at that point, and the stuff with Lana and the thing with Rusev, and I mean, you can like it or not like it, but he wasn't positioned as this main event guy,
right?
But over the last 12 to 16 months, absolutely has been, and I think that's a really good thing. So I mean, I'm not going to give it like a letter grade or a number grade, but I would just say it felt like a solid reign, something that he deserved, and I mean, you know, pretty amazing too. If you think about the fact that is he 45 now? I mean, and he's to go and have a reign like that and not look like, oh, why'd they put the belt on this guy at 44 or 45, you know? And not just about, I can't really think of anybody who might have pulled that off, especially if it's their first reign with that title. But yeah, very good.
Mex, what are your thoughts on the reign of the Almighty?
I'll read this comment we've got first from Yusuf Omar. So Lashley mixed bag reign has come to an end, and WWE have been successful in telling the story that Lashley can't win without MVP interfering. Which is a pretty harsh take, but I think, you know, when you say that, Yusuf, we have to remember that MVP is a heel. So ultimately, MVP is allowed to interfere if he needs to make sure his man wins. I do think this is a reign where, you know, me and you, Adrian, every time it's pay-per-view and time to defend, we're watching with, you know, our hands over our eyes thinking, is Bobby going to continue? Is this going to really happen?
Right.
So in that aspect, it's been a bit of a refreshing, you know, reign, like you said, how he's been dealt with, how he's carried himself. I just think even the slogan, the Hurt Business alone, has done a lot for just pushing this through the whole story of, you know, I'm just in the business of literally hurting people. I take my check, I take my championship, and I'm moving to the next guy. That kind of stuff. The Hurt Business as a faction was just so good, to the fact that they were getting over as faces, and they had to basically disband the faction so that Drew could, you know, be cheered and not booed ultimately when they got to WrestleMania.
Right.
You know, this guy walked into WrestleMania with a WWE Championship. Even then, we doubted it. He walked out with the WWE Championship, something that little men do. It doesn't matter what your name is. Like, there is not a long list of people that have done that. Like Kevin said, I just think that, you know, this is just something that has gone from strength to strength in some places. He's looked good at his age to become a first-time WWE champion, and no one's doubted it. No one has said, there's people, we look at like Christian or someone in, AEW, and we know they're getting on in age and stuff like that. And you think, oh, okay, like, I don't want to see this necessarily. And can he still go and stuff? No one's questioned Bobby Lashley, like,
not
in terms of his physical ability to carry out what he's been doing. MVP as well deserves his props, man, because I know obviously with some help, backstage, whether that's writing the scripts or this, that, and the other, MVP has obviously offered a lot. Their relationship is, you can see, it's very beneficial to everything they've done here. So yeah, the only thing is this kind of knee-jerk reaction of, okay, we need ratings tonight, let's change the champion sort of thing. It's a bit of a leaving a sour taste in my mouth. But like you said, I don't think this was planned. I've read today that Big E was meant to become champion on the 4th of October show, the draft. So they were going to do it then, sort of thing. But for whatever reason, they've pulled the trigger, which, yeah, Bobby Lashley looked good going out, I guess, the way he did. They probably run it back at Extreme Rules for the championship. But yeah, it's been a very, very good reign. They've handled this pretty well at a difficult time in just general booking, in my opinion.
You mentioned something, and it was going to be my next question. What is next for Bobby Lashley? Are we going to get a straightaway rematch for the two of them? Obviously, we know that Goldberg is kind of, still breathing down his neck in terms of, beating up his son, and it's become a personal thing and not necessarily about the championship. Saudi Arabia show's coming up soon. What is next for Lashley going forward the next few months? I'll hit that to Mex. You go for it.
Yeah, I think it's Goldberg, Saudi Arabia. Maybe Goldberg is even the person that comes into Extreme Rules, to cost him, so he doesn't look too weak, losing to Big E again. Even though Big E could probably do with a clean win. Yeah, and after Saudi Arabia, because I'm sure Goldberg's gonna win, that's when we really need to start, ringing the alarm bells of what's happening to Bobby Lashley, because a couple of losses and then all of a sudden you're not a top guy anymore.
That is very true. Kevin, thoughts on that one?
I hope that Max is not right about the Goldberg beating Lashley. I mean, I can see it happening, and the way the story is being built up with Lashley, putting his hands on Goldberg's son and all that. But yeah, it doesn't look good, because if you look at Goldberg's win-loss record, even, it's terrible. Like, he's under 500, and this is this legend in the business. You can like the style of wrestling that Goldberg does or not, with the very the truncated matches and all that. But the truth is, I mean, he was a huge star. I don't think it even helps his legacy. I mean, for him to come back and win a title and then lose it back in the next match, and we're not talking about a championship in this case, but he'll walk away after having won that match and lost the previous. Like, what did that do for him? So we'll see. I think Lashley, if he was able to rebound from the Lana storyline and the Aleister Black, and there's always a way.
Don't forget the sisters.
Oh God, the sisters.
Yeah, I mean, oh God, yeah, I blocked that out. But it's just, if there's a way to come back from that, I mean, like, it would take some tweaking. It would take a fresh feud. But I think we're going to see some roster changes, coming up probably in the next few months anyway. So, so I don't think Bobby Lashley in the main event, whether or not he has the championship, is going to end anytime soon. And I think there's still a very clear road to build between Lashley and Lesnar at WrestleMania, if that's what wanted. And I think if it's not this WrestleMania coming up, it's a matter of time before we see that match.
Oh, Talk of Champions says Bobby gets traded to SmackDown. Lesnar versus Lashley. My hopes for Lesnar versus Lashley disappeared as soon as Lesnar came out at SummerSlam and squared up to Cena and Roman Reigns, because for me that would have been the perfect time to kick off things with Lashley after him beating Goldberg, maybe, or beforehand as well. But who knows? The draft is coming. Lashley could be traded to SmackDown. Lesnar could be champion by at some point, and possibly Lesnar versus Lashley. Is it still a possibility? Oh, I don't know. I'm kind of in like the lower 50% area of that happening. But we'll see. Moving things on, but we're still talking about Bobby Lashley because in this year's PWI 500, Bobby Lashley came in at number 3. Now, for me, just that alone is massive because the argument between 1 and 2 is almost like they both should have just been joint number 1. So for Lashley to be number 3, to me, he's number 2.
It does feel very far from the top, innit?
It kind of does, but at the same time, Lashley, was also the highest ranking black wrestler in this year's list. What was amazing as well about this year's list is that for the first time, 2 black wrestlers were in the top 10 at the same time, with Rich Swann coming in number 10. Kevin, give us the insight as to, I think it's a little bit obvious, but give us the insight as to why Bobby Lashley came in at number 3. And was there a conversation about Lashley coming higher than that?
We did talk about it. I think the consensus was that Reigns was still the top. I'm already thinking ahead to that feud and how that's going to end. That Reigns was still the top star in WWE over the evaluation period, which stretches from July 1st to the 30th of June of this year. And it was partly, his reign was a little bit shorter, but also just the way that Roman Reigns, and I mean, of course, Lashley has been a huge presence on Raw. Roman Reigns has, along with Bianca Belair until recently, essentially just been SmackDown.
Right.
And was positioned, doing the best work of his career. I would argue that Lashley has been as well. So it wasn't terribly far off, but I think the idea was, okay, I think we have to look at Roman Reigns as the top WWE guy. He also had a very big year. And then we, compared him and Kenny from there and landed the way we did. But I think, and I think I said this on the PWI podcast the other day, had Lashley won the title a little bit earlier, gotten a few more defenses in, we could have been looking at a 3-way race for number 1. And that would have been
amazing.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't think we've ever been in that situation. This is maybe the closest we've been to it. At least as long as I've been in the committee and had any say in it at all. Lashley, I mean, he's number 3 on the strength of everything we talked about. He had this huge reign, awesome main event run, great defenses, leader of the hottest faction in the company.
Yep.
Many, many reasons. And his ring work, I mean, I think it doesn't get talked about enough that Lashley in the ring is awesome.
Very true.
And he doesn't necessarily work. I mean, he's shown over the years that he can do a lot of different styles, and maybe in Impact he was a little bit more, okay, I'm going to move around a little more, be a little more agile. Right. He can still do that, even at 45, I have no doubt. But that's not the style he's working. That's not the style he should work with this character. But he had some great hard-hitting matches, and especially, I mean, the rivalry with McIntyre was so good, and I think showcased the best that both of those guys can do. So he was, I mean, we briefly discussed McIntyre at 3, Lashley at 4, but that very quickly fizzled, especially as the rivalry went on and Lashley won multiple times in a row. But I think even before that, we certainly had Lashley slotted in at 3, and not to take anything away from McIntyre, but Lashley was just top guy on Raw all year.
Interesting. And I think it's very, very correct because, as we saw, during McIntyre's reign, he was the company. He literally was the company. When Lashley came in, this is why, for me and Mex, especially leading up to WrestleMania, we were just like, well, McIntyre's going to walk out as champion because he's been the guy for a whole year. There's no way Lashley's going to go over on him at the biggest show, at the first show in front of a crowd in 18 months and all that kind of stuff. But lo and behold, Lashley incapacitated Drew McIntyre, and that for me was like the big thing. It wasn't it wasn't MVP hitting Drew McIntyre with his cane. It was Lashley incapacitated the biggest star of the last 12 months in WWE. And, so while for me, there's no real argument whether Lashley should have come higher or been in the top two. I don't think you can argue that with what Roman Reigns and Kenny Omega have done in the last year. But at the same time, for me, there was no way Lashley could have possibly been any lower than 3.
Yeah.
Because I would have had some things to say. So again, let's move on to number 2. Number 2, as I mentioned earlier, was Rich Swann. Rich Swann creeped in at number 10. I've got a little bit of an argument for this one. I'm actually a little bit surprised that he's reached number 10, maybe 11 or 12. But why did Rich Swann manage to creep in at number 10 for you, Kevin?
Yeah, it was a little bit controversial. I think there's still this perception that, well, I mean, it's 2 things. One is by the time the magazine came out, Rich Swann had fallen way down the card.
Right.
But during our evaluation period, which ended at the end of June this year, he was very, very strong. Even though he'd lost the title by then, he was, still doing pretty well on Impact. I mean, our weekly ratings that we put up on our website, he was top 5, top 3 even most weeks.
Right.
Strong win-loss record, rallied back from injury, and had this great run during a period where it should be mentioned, we kind of opened up, and this is something that not a lot of people will necessarily know about, but Pro Wrestling Illustrated and related magazines have always designated certain championships as world titles, given them that status. And it's not that we're just, the emperor of wrestling and we get to do that. It's a holdover from some of the old boxing magazines, actually, and other magazines that predate PWI, because boxing and wrestling were covered very similarly years ago. And a lot of times in the same magazines. And the idea behind that was there were, 10, 15 guys claiming to be the world champion at any point in boxing. So similarly in wrestling, and some were a little more legitimate than others. It was historically just a couple of titles that we would recognize, say like, okay, this is the biggest championship in this promotion. This is the biggest championship in this. We eventually got back down to just one championship when WWE only had a single championship. It opened back up. One of the companies that used to have world title status was Impact. And then when they kind of had that half year that they took off, they didn't have not took off, but they didn't have a cable deal here in the US. Didn't have any tapings even really during that time. They were stripped of that status. I don't know whether I totally agreed with that, but I mean, I was not in a position to argue it. I was just a freelancer. I give my 2 cents, but ultimately it's not my call. But that status was given back this year. And I think on the strength of, even if it's not as visible a product as it was at its peak, Impact has been a solid wrestling product, just in-ring product. They have some good storylines as well. Of course, they aren't totally not sports entertainment. They have that element. But Rich Swann, to us, kind of re-legitimized the promotion in a big way, and not just by facing Kenny Omega and ultimately, losing that feud. Impact was kind of like in a very uncertain space, and then Eddie Edwards and Eric Young had brief reigns as champion, and that was fine to like kind of reestablish the company and get it back to its sort of TNA roots, but the good TNA. But then when Rich Swann won, that actually felt like a new star being created. And even though people knew who Rich Swann was, it didn't feel like, okay, they're putting the title on a WWE guy. Rich Swann in Impact is very different than the Rich Swann we saw in WWE. He's competing, he's doing some of the same moves, but he's positioned a lot more as a heavyweight, even though, again, just about the same size. And was really just credible in that role as world champion. And I think between the quality of his matches, his win-loss record, going up against anybody and everybody, and then again, just really lending a lot of credibility to Impact as it got into this whole Forbidden Door territory. That's why he's number 10.
Mix, I know that with us doing this show, it's now been a year, very funnily enough. And actually, something I should have said at the start of the show is on the way here. I was checking some of our older stuff. Our first show that was on YouTube was all about Big E's singles push and how that kicked off. That's crazy. That's about a year ago.
Wow.
Anyway, moving back to Rich Swann. I know that through this show, you've kind of started, making sure you watching what's going on Impact. I gave you your homework to do and all that kind of stuff. How has the Rich Swann story made a difference to you now kind of being invested in Impact? And then obviously we see the likes of Moose, Chris Bay, and a few other guys as well. How has that Rich Swann's involvement changed it?
Yeah, definitely. It helped when I started trying to tune into Impact more, because obviously he was a familiar face from WWE and stuff. So yeah, and his ascent to the championship, I think, was done pretty well. His reign was pretty good, and obviously that came to an end when the Forbidden Door opened. But obviously he played a key part in that. Being, it's easy to just say, "Oh, Kenny Omega went after this person," but everything would have been in place to ensure that they could trust who the guy is going to be to take on Kenny Omega in all his glory when he comes over to Impact. So we can't kind of just say, lightly that, Rich Swann just happened to be champion at the time. No, he done a good job. He trusted him. He put on good matches. Even the feud with Kenny Omega was good. We wish that Impact and Rich Swann would have benefited a bit more on the AEW side of things. Because even still that relationship, I don't know what kind of one-way relationship it is.
I don't understand it.
It's a little weird at times, yeah.
Yes, but other than that, Rich Swann, like then you said, Moose, and Moose is again someone that I had heard a lot about, hadn't seen much of his work. He kind of changed his appearance and everything, especially after his run-in with EC3. Another name that kind of drew me towards it, Chris Bay, I've been watching for a long time. So when they signed him, I was instantly excited. There's names over guys. Willie Mack was up there as well around the time, when Rich Swann really probably earned, this position. But yeah, just for Kevin to know as well, from a lot of people I've spoken to, a lot of people are obviously annoyed and confused as to why he's number 10, and thought someone that we're going to talk about very soon, Jonathan Gresham, should have probably beat him to that position. I'm guessing it's because he's held a world championship somewhat. But like Adrian as well mentioned, this is it's like he's kind of snuck in the back door sort of thing. But I think if we kind of look at it holistically, he somewhat deserves to be there.
It's correct. Yeah. I believe it to be correct, if I'm honest. I mean, Mix, you made a very good point. I think that is a very massive difference maker, is with Impact knowing that they were going to do this whole thing with AEW and Kenny Omega and all the rest of it. They had to position someone and had to think about who is going to be that guy. They chose Rich Swann. For me, that is a massive difference maker in terms of, because I think it's the second most important criteria on the PWI list is influence. Now, for Rich Swann to be chosen as the guy, there's no bigger influence within that promotion. So for me, it does make sense. Moving to number 3, we've talked about this guy a lot already, so we probably won't stay here for too long. But number 3 was Big E, who came in on the list at 13. We've cited his singles push, him winning the Intercontinental Championship as well for a second time. It was mentioned in the magazine that he won the Money in the Bank, but that was, of course, just after the evaluation period. Was that actually taken into account at any point at all, Kevin, with the Money in the Bank, even though it was kind of just after the evaluation period?
I mean, we do. I'd be lying if we said it didn't enter into it at all. Officially, it didn't count in terms of his wins and losses. But when someone goes into Money in the Bank, it's rare that it's a complete, and sometimes they do it, but it's rare that it's a complete upset and the unexpected person wins. There's usually 2 or 3 top contenders. And so even though it was a little bit after the evaluation period, he certainly had some really good momentum heading into it. He was, even after losing the Intercontinental title, he still was positioned as a top star on SmackDown. Was when house shows started up again, which may have just been right after the end of the period. He was winning matches there. Popularity enters into it as well, because again, SmackDown was hurting for top baby faces, and even though he wasn't main eventing just yet, he was clearly on the path toward that, whatever show he was going to do it on. So he gets a lot of credit for that. I mean, another thing to mention is, when we talk in terms of influence, the top promotions in the world the wrestlers are going to tend to fare better if they're competing at that high level and they have the wins, a good win-loss record, championships, quality of competition, and all that. So one thing we do when we're putting this list together is, of course, we have all of the rosters pulled up, the active rosters and the people who qualify. And at a certain point, we're like, okay, before we go any further on this, who are we missing? And I don't think anybody was missing Big E at that point, but it's kind of like, you can't justify putting him too much lower, because he's, even back then, was one of the most ascendant stars in WWE in a year where a couple of guys really dominated. So I don't think he could have gone too much higher, but obviously next year, if he continues along this pace, he's set to do very well. And the fact that he had the Money in the Bank win, we sort of treat that maybe not quite with quite as much weight as a Royal Rumble win, but it's along those lines. It's this big match like once a year. So that does get considered as well. Again, unless it's, I was about to say a fluke win like Otis's, but even Otis did a whole lot better because he won that match. So anyway, I hope I answered your question. That was a little bit all over the place.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. That's fine. Let's move on to number 4, who was Jonathan Gresham, who came in at number 20 on the list. Jonathan Gresham, of course, won the ROH Pure Championship, the first Pure Champion in 14 years. Massive deal. I mean, the whole thing was centered around him. He was the one that steered the ship with the tournament itself, the promos beforehand, everything during the tournament. His matches were phenomenal. Obviously, he's come away with the championship, the cup, and was the ROH Tag Team Champion as well at the time. And again, the other thing that came in his favor was that he was the leader. I mean, I didn't even think of this because Jay Lethal was there, but Jonathan Gresham was the leader of the foundation. Mex, you mentioned how you've had a few conversations about him maybe should have been higher. Why do you think he possibly should have been higher?
I think it's just the outstanding year he's had, the accolades, like we said, tag champion over there, ROH. This belt they've brought back, the Pure Championship, he's won it, and just outstanding performances back to back. Now, I'm not someone that probably knew a lot about Jonathan Gresham within the last year. Like, I've just done a lot of watching him, so even character wise, I don't really know what he's like, but because of where he is, I guess, where he's positioned and who he works for, it's not even so much of a big thing right now. Like, every time I see this guy, he's just putting on phenomenal matches. And I want to see him on a bigger stage because he can definitely deliver from that point of view anyway. Especially, Daniel Bryan has now walked into AEW. Daniel Bryan, a former Pure Champion. If we could get Daniel Bryan, Jonathan Gresham, I'll be salivating. Like, that is wrestling at its pure, at the core. Literally, like, that is what it should be. So, I think depending, I don't know what his career contract looks like over the next year or so, but this could be someone, especially maybe in the next few years, that could be doing something within the top 20, maybe top 10, because he's got bags of ability.
Here's my quick take on Jonathan Gresham. Both, his standing, how he is, where he is, and what he can possibly achieve. For me, this guy's been doing this thing for years. I believe it's around the 13-year mark, if not more. He's been doing his thing, and he has always been that guy that people want to see, because every single time he pulls it out of the bag, every single match, it's amazing. And what's interesting is I had a conversation with Alfred Conwell, who was last week, if not 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about the forecast of AEW and, the likes of Daniel Bryan walking in, CM Punk, Adam Cole. And one of the questions that I asked Alfred was, who do you think is that black star who is not in WWE currently that could walk into AEW now and get a massive reaction? And, Alfred said Lee Moriarty. Literally the next day, Lee Moriarty was signed. I believe Tony Khan was watching the show. But the other person that we mentioned was Jonathan Gresham. And again, the match of Gresham versus Daniel Bryan, or Bryan Danielson, as he is again now, is the one thing that so many people have been waiting for. Kevin, for me, why do you think... what is the reason for Jonathan Gresham not ranking higher than Rich Swann? I mean, I know exactly why, but for you to just explain it, just
Sure.
give us that take.
So over the years, Ring of Honor wrestlers have sometimes been even top 5. That's rare. Never topped the list. Ring of Honor this year was sort of in a rebuilding year, where they really did the responsible thing by not holding any events for a long time. I don't think anybody could really argue that. And then even when they did hold the events, they did it in this controlled bubble setting where maybe some of the wrestlers were performing a little less. Even though Gresham was not the world champion, I mean, worth noting, Rush is actually not on the list. He didn't wrestle enough matches. So nominally the top guy in Ring of Honor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, we have an activity cutoff. It's 10 matches, or you can wrestle 6 matches, 6 separate months. But even if he had qualified, I think there would have been a strong case to put Gresham above him, just because he was the guy who was really carrying the company. I mean, leading the foundation, tag team champion, pure champion at the same time. And I mean, winning that tournament was huge, high level of competition there. And then of course the quality of his matches. I think technical ability is one of our criteria. Because it's a little more subjective, we tend not to lean on it as heavily. But if there's a situation where someone's work is truly outstanding, like I think had it not been Gresham, but somebody else who was a little bit less phenomenal in the ring, probably not top 20, even with those same exact everything else. They're adequate worker, decent, good matches. Same exact win-loss record, leading a group, same championship reigns, not top 20, just because Ring of Honor was in this kind of rebuilding year. They weren't doing the touring that they normally, and again, this is all good. These are responsible things they were doing. I can see the argument for putting him higher. Honestly, I thought we were going to get pushback on him being 20 because he was technically a secondary champion in Ring of Honor for him to be that high, above the world champions of a few other promotions. But no, I it's hard to argue with it. Honestly, I think just the quality of his work, and what he meant to the company, which I do think is, especially lately, some of the pay-per-views they've been running really kind of on the up again. I think there's an argument you could make to put him in the top 10. I don't know whether the rest, that's just me. And we try to, technically I have the editorial call, but we really do try to keep it down to consensus. If the whole group feels that things should go one way, we'll go that way. Yeah, no, I think there's absolutely an argument to be made that he should have been higher and maybe even top 10.
Amazing. I'm going to move this one quite quickly now, because we're going to talk about number 5 and then go through a few other positionings of a few people and stuff like that. And then also talk about, the importance of the representation in this year's list and of course last year's as well. Number 5 is Keith Lee. I guess for me, again, this was similar to Rich Swann in the sense of where they are now makes you think, oh, so why is he that high? But of course, he was the first ever double NXT champion. I think that came within this year's evaluation period. Of course, he on the main roster on Raw defeated Randy Orton, and magazine mentions as well, he has wins over Adam Cole, Andrade, and Sheamus. These are all, former NXT champions, a former WWE champion. Again, that makes a difference in terms of the quality of opponents that he's defeated as well. Kevin, can you kind of give me an insight as to, and actually, here's another thing. He was the only person of this top 5 black wrestlers that dropped positions. Does that have something to do? Yeah, from the last year. So last year he was at number
11.
Sorry, no, he went up only. Sorry, he went up only 2. He was at number 26 last year, and now 24 this year. Sorry. Does that change? Does his last few months have an effect on his overall standing? Could he have been higher if he was more active over the last 6 months or so?
I do. In fact, there I was thinking he was top 20 last year because he had that momentum that was tremendous. Yeah, his inactivity for sure hurt him. I think some people might even question him being as high as he is because he missed so much time. And again, very serious medical reasons. He did the right thing taking off. I see that note that the main roster ruined Keith. I mean, some of that was, he was out due to medical issues, but yeah, his presentation when he first came up, they were changing his music, changing his attire. They were, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Right.
But even with all that, you look at what he did in NXT, essentially got called up right away because, wow, okay, we can't not have this guy on the main roster because he was trusted enough to be in that position where he beat Adam. I think actually beat Adam Cole the first day of the evaluation period and then was a double champion.
Wow.
Held it for a little while and then, of course, dropped it pretty quickly so that he could be called up and then beat Orton, had a lot of momentum, and then, it got stopped. But popularity, very high, technical ability, very high, quality of competition, high. I think in any other year where he was not injured, I mean, we're looking at a top 10 for Keith Lee if he had been healthy all year and pushed the way he seemed to be positioned to be pushed.
Brilliant. Now I'm going to go through a few things, just a few little fun facts, I guess, and, other little things and get your insight, Kevin, on a few things as well. Trish Adora was ranked as the highest female, not just black female, but female in this list. Of course, females have only just started being included since last year. The females included are those that have had subsequent, enough matches against male competition as well. Trish Adora came in at number 44. What was the most important thing, or what was the main factor for her reaching so high on the list?
Her influence, the Pan-African World Diaspora Championship reign. So that championship was given world title status a couple months, I guess it's a couple of months ago now. And the idea behind that was this is a very influential championship. It hasn't been defended many, many times yet. The intention from anybody I've spoken to is to have it defended all over the world, have it defended in Europe and Africa and South America, other parts of North America, Canada, Mexico, wherever, Japan. I know Trish's game for that just from talking to her. Amazing technical wrestler. I think, she's worked a lot with Jonathan Gresham. She's just watched hundreds of, I think, of Bryan Danielson matches. There's no accident then that she does this and then comes out and wrestles the kind of matches she does, where she's just incredible technician in the ring. Just very popular. And again, this is a situation where, a couple of people that had not heard of the championship before and not understood the cultural importance of it, and how it provided representation and it provided this a chance for wrestlers of African descent to compete for something that was theirs. It was people who this title was brand new to, like, okay, that's been defended this many times. I'm like, well, yes, but if you look at the AEW world title, that was given world title status before it was even won. So you have to go with your gut on these things sometimes.
Very interesting.
And I think that was a good idea. I think AEW has shown that it deserved that status. But
of course,
it's my take on it is Pro Wrestling Illustrated at its core, historically, even if it's not fully kayfabe anymore, it's largely not kayfabe. Honestly, it's just the rankings and a few other remnants. But I think it's lousy to think the only way that a title can be deserving of that elevated status is being on national television in the US.
Right.
That's kind of so in opening it up, that was one of the first championships we had our eye on. And I mean, another one was the IWTV title, which had more defenses, but again, still a much newer title, not known by most wrestling fans, maybe. So that was a huge part of it. But I mean, she wrestled anybody and everybody. She's incredibly popular. And yeah, to some extent, it's still like those in the know about her, but that's not going to be that way for long.
Right.
So we were kind of, in recognizing the championship, we were kind of banking on that, but she had this momentum too. And it's kind of like, well, she needs to be pretty high on this list, because by the time this list comes out, like, people are going to be, why is she so low? And rightfully so. She earned it. Great wrestler, great person. I'm very happy for her to be in that position. I honestly, with her being, anytime there's an independent wrestler, like purely independent wrestler, and Lee Moriarty was in this situation too, I always expect there to be some resistance among people who don't know them as well. But I think by the time we'd gotten into that meeting, the word was just spreading about her so much.
Right.
Like, oh yeah,
Right.
44, that sounds good. So good for Trish. Also worth noting, highest ranking ever for a woman. And although last year was the first, and although we did just start ranking more women last year, based again on like intergender matches, titles that are like the Pan African World Diaspora title that are not tied to any gender. We had a handful. I think it was 4 or 5 over the years. Sarah Del Rey was the most recent in 2012. So there was precedent. But yeah, Trish shattered the record. Nobody had made the top 50 before.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't even notice that. So that's news to me. So that's phenomenal. You mentioned Lee Moriarty. Lee Moriarty did this amazing thing of ranking higher than Seth Rollins. That is crazy to me. It's mad. It's mad, and I'm sure he felt the same way. But because we're short of time, I'm not going to necessarily go on asking about certain people and stuff like that. My biggest question I wanted to ask, you just mentioned when talking about Trish Adora, how important the Pan African Diaspora Championship is for the culture, for us as representation. When you have now these conversations and you have your meetings about the list and whatnot, and we've seen more black wrestlers on the list. I think this year there was almost 90, where last year there was almost 73. I think the year before that was probably only about 30 something. Yeah. Why have you almost made it a mission to make sure that the list is more representative of both more races, not just black wrestlers, of course, right. And also females as well? What is the mindset behind that?
I mean, it goes back to 2019 when I was part of the committee, so I can't say like I have no responsibility for that or whatever. I wasn't editor, but the truth was that the committee mostly focuses on, and I don't think this is a secret, mostly focuses on that first 10, 20, 30 through 100 and something, and then the people who are working on the back end of it, the independent side, for example, that's a much smaller group. So I kind of made it my mission, and especially like we had some staffing changes, not just Stu retiring, but Dan Murphy, who'd been with the magazine for years, left. And I think he was maybe in tune to different parts of the independent scene than I was. And to be completely honest, there were a lot of wrestlers I didn't know about. And the angry mentions at PWI and, the alternate lists, the Black Wrestling's 500. It's not the only one. There's the
BRP 50.
BRP 50. Yes, sorry.
Yep.
It's great that people were going out there and doing that and putting names forward, but also in contention. Like, oh, why is this person not being mentioned? And it's funny because I always consider myself like someone who was sensitive to different things. Like I would, if, you know, when the Oscar So White thing was happening years ago, when, you know, the Grammys year after year were a lot of white artists nominated, like Radiohead every single year, and nothing against Radiohead, but it's just no matter what they put out, they would get an album of the year nomination.
Right.
And lack of diversity in other areas. And I would be the first person to be like, yeah, that's like messed up. Did they not think about this person or this movie or whatever was big that year? But wrestling, I was always kind of like, well, we're reporting who's pushed and blah, blah, blah. And I don't have any say on the back end of it and blah, blah, blah. And was kind of defeatist about it, that's lousy. It's a lousy attitude to have. Why does wrestling get a pass on that? Why do we get a pass on that? So rather than like take exception to it, I thought like, you know, I at least need to like look at some of these names that I've not heard of. And then I look like, oh, this person had 3 different regional championships and they held them most of the year.
Right.
You know, this person won 2 tournaments. This person is getting rave reviews for their technical work, but or they're high flying or whatever else. But, you know, they haven't been over to Japan yet, or they haven't been to PWG where they have that extra level of visibility. Growing up reading PWI and the other wrestling magazines, the one thing I always loved about them is that they were informative and told me about these wrestlers I'd never heard about before, especially the ones who were worth attention. They weren't just mentioning any like scrub or whatever. It was, you know, and taking over as editor, to me, I wanted to make sure that the different groups were represented, the different quality. I mean, the truth is nobody's asking for crappy wrestlers, and I'm not going to judge anybody's in-ring skill, because the worst wrestler is 100 times better than I could do. But like the most unremarkable wrestlers, that's not who people are advocating to see in these lists in the magazine. They're advocating for excellence and greatness in all its forms. So people out there, you know, the angry feedback, but also the, hey, what's up with this kind of feedback? Like, it's good to have conversations, like the one we're having even here right now. So, I mean, that's basically it. It's trying to prioritize that, but in a way that makes sense. One thing, I mean, I'll point it out. I'm surprised I'm sure some people have talked about this, but PWI 500 never had a black wrestler as number 1. Never. It's never happened. Not even The Rock.
Nope. Rock was number 2. Number 2.
And before my time at the magazine, so I can't say exactly why that was. It was Triple H that year. You know, that's it's a commentary on the business because we're using our criteria, but it's also, okay, really, there was never a year where there were 2 black wrestlers who should have been in the top 10, you know, that kind of stuff. And we need to, it's passing the buck if we're saying we're just going on who's on TV. Especially if we're trying to have this more sports-based approach to covering it, where we're acknowledging it's entertainment, but, you know, it's based on sports.
Right.
You know, at any rate, I mean, I think it will be awesome, not if, when we get to the day where a black wrestler is number 1 in the list. It's happened in the women's list. The very first edition, it was Awesome Kong. But yeah, I think just actually closely looking at things, considering everything, taking your own criteria seriously, this is all part of it. I think we still have a way to go. PWI does, the business does. Always open to feedback. I don't, you know, I have a quality filter, so I don't see everybody's DM right away, but I leave my DMs open. You can add us. You know, we're not doing everything right, and I hope, you know, a year from now I can look back and say, man, we really missed out on this, and we're doing so much better now. And then the same year later. That's my hope. For me, I have to commend, you know, for what PWI has definitely done in the last 2 years, for sure. As you know, we've spoken before, and I've said that even just the criteria alone is one of my favorite things. Any list that I've ever done, or the ones that I try to do now, are based on almost exactly the same structure. But to then now notice, for me, you've kind of, you know, broken the barrier just in noticing what's missing. And actively working at trying to change that and make it different, more inclusive, and literally, you know, trying to find more people, whether they be white, black, Mexican, Japanese, you know, it doesn't matter. It's just about
having this criteria, making sure as well that the magazine itself, being with the list being as influential and as prominent as it is, kind of needs to know who everyone that's out there for that list to be as genuine as possible. Mex, I already know the time's gone. We've gone over an hour. The radio manager
sorry, guys.
is going to kill me. That's fine. But this is important. Mex, I'm going to give you the final word. For you, doing what you do, you've been doing, wrestling journalism now for just over a year, maybe. Kevin, make sure you keep your eye on Mex. He's the hardest working journalist in the business. For you, how does these types of conversations and inclusivity and all the rest of it help you to do what you're doing? And do you think there's more that can be done?
There's definitely more that can be done, but even through meeting yourself, Dazzle, and speaking to others and everything, it's now more of a thing that I'm making sure that my voice was being heard against some of these things, because nothing changes unless you make noise, I guess.
Right.
You voice your opinion, and in the right way as well. There's a wrong way to do it, that's for sure, but there's a right way you can intellectually put your thoughts and stuff across.
Right.
Like even when I watched Raw, for instance, Big E wins the championship, there was a slight thing that went across my mind that thought, okay, the last two guys that have won it are black, but they both won it on Raw. Why not on a pay-per-view? Like,
right.
That was something I thought of. There's still that, yeah. And I'm not trying to get into my feelings about something like that. I like to think I'm one of the more optimistic wrestling fans, which just thinks, okay, we've had 2 championships, we've got a championship change on TV, and you've got another black champion, making 4 in the history. So, and that's the way I just left it, sort of thing. But yeah, it's definitely making sure that just as Kevin and his team will try to look at every corner to make sure everything is covered and included on the list, I try to do the same even in my videos. I want everyone from all kinds of backgrounds to give their opinion, because no 2 people are alike. Our thought patterns are different and all of that kind of stuff. So the representation, within wrestling, I think is definitely generally getting better. I was always told, wrestling was a white man's sport and all this, and and there's gatekeepers and this, that, and the other. But definitely, if you look at WWE, and WWE is the biggest product out there, you could definitely see. Well, if that was the case, there's been a lot of black and Spanish champions and Japanese champions in the last even 5 years, sort of thing. So things are definitely on the up. I think we need to get maybe more representation probably at the top level of these companies that are the influencers, if you like, the promotions, the big brands of journalism and the outlets on YouTube and stuff like that. If we can get more representation there, and again, it's not even just blacks, we get more Spanish or more people from the Far East in there, then that will help kind of cultivate a more diverse and round picture for some of the news and stuff that we hear. But definitely moving in the right direction.
For sure. I want to take the opportunity to thank you, Kevin, for joining us. Just give us really quickly where we can follow either yourself or PWI on social media. Well,
my handle's on the screen at McElvaney. That was meant to be a playoff last name, but it's a weird last name, so nobody's going to remember it. If you can see it, then there it is. If not, at official PWI, I'm linked on there, and then our website's linked on there, pwi-online.com. You can buy individual issues, subscribe. We have a blog, podcasts. You can sign up for our newsletter, et cetera, et cetera.
And Kevin, I just have to say, we got someone here in the chat that's asking specifically where they can find the list. So just plug the magazine and let
So if you go to pwi500.com, it doesn't have the list in full, but it does have a link to purchase the digital edition. If you Google this, I'm honestly surprised if nobody's put it up totally somewhere. It's going to be on Reddit or something. Which, I mean, like, we're never I'm maybe not going to advertise that on PWI's Twitter, but like it's okay. Go look at the list. Thank you both for having me. This was a lot of fun.
No problem, man. This has been amazing. You lot have given me work to do when I go home tonight. I'm gonna have to edit this down to an hour somehow. That's just for radio, but on YouTube, the full thing, hour and 10 minutes is right here. I don't have to do anything with that. That's brilliant. Folks, thanks again for joining us. Of course, you can follow me, Black Wrestling Alliance, on Instagram, Black Wrestling A on Twitter. I need to change that because it's too long. I don't know what to change it to. You can follow this guy, Mex, on WrestleManiac.uk on Instagram and WrestleManiac UK on Twitter. Folks, our time is done, well overdue, but it's all good because the conversation was great, and we will see you again next week. See you later, folks.
Take care, guys.